감각이 얼마나 중요한지 밝혀내고 일상에서 활용하는 법을 제시하는 과학자 찰스 스펜스. 과자 씹는 소리를 깊게 연구해서 괴짜 과학자상을 받기도 한 그는 세계적 기업들이 제품을 개발할 때 가장 먼저 찾는 감각 연구의 세계적인 권위자인데요. 잠들어 있는 감각을 깨워 더 나은 일상을 만드는 비법을 지금 공개합니다.
Welcome to EBS with a hand swap. My name is Professor Charles Spence, an experimental psychologist and professor at the University of Oxford. Why are so many of the rest of us suffering from health and well-being issues in the contemporary era? Probably it's got something to do with the recent COVID pandemic and other stresses in the environment. But I think it has a lot more to do with the unacknowledged impact of the environment on us, the environment that infects us through all of our senses. And what happens, I think, if we suffer from a sensory imbalance, with its overstimulation of the rational senses of hearing and vision and the understimulation of our more emotional senses, is that leads to a number of health and well-being issues that are becoming increasingly apparent in society today. And that can be everything from the rise of stress-related illnesses through to the growing number of people who one speaks to who complain about an inability to sleep. And how could we think about sense hacking the environment, be it of the home or of the workplace, in order to introduce pleasant fragrances and scents that can help to improve our mood, to improve our well-being, to help us to sleep, and even to make us more productive in the workplace. All this is possible once we acknowledge the power of the senses over us and the fact that the sensory environment, what it smells, looks and sounds like, even what it feels like, has more impact on us than any of us probably realise. And three of my favourite studies from that field of sensory marketing that really illustrate not only how little we're aware of the environment, but also how much it impacts us, starts from a supermarket in the Midlands in the UK back in 1997 from a study from Adrian North and colleagues. You have to imagine the scene. You're in the supermarket and there are shelves of French wine and of German wine. And what happens is that day by day or week by week, either French accordion music is played in the supermarket. You can almost imagine yourself on the banks of the River Seine. Other days and other weeks, instead, German Oompa music is played, something you might find in a beer keller instead. The experimenters, North and colleagues, just measure wine sales over the period of the study. And what they find is that when French music is playing in the supermarket, about 75% of the bottles of wine sold are French and only 25% German. But on those days where German music is playing in the supermarket instead, suddenly those percentages reverse, and now most people, about 72%, are buying German wine. So on the one hand, this shows just how much the auditory environment, the music that surrounds us, impacts our shopping behaviour. But what's even more striking was that when people came away from the till in this study, and the experimenters asked them, why exactly did you buy that French wine today? Was it anything to do with the music? Then only 6 out of the 44 who were quizzed thought that the music had any impact on their behaviour. The rest were all convinced they always wanted to buy French wine or German. They were going to cook a beef bourguignon or something, so it had to be a French wine. So what does this show? That the majority of people's behaviour is being influenced by the music playing in the background, but virtually no one acknowledges or realises its impact on them. We all think we're in control of ourselves, what we choose to do, but more often than we realise, it's the sights, the sounds and the smells that surround us that are in fact driving our behaviour and our choices instead. When you think about smell, can we also encourage people to enter or keep them away from a place through smell? I think that we can, and one of the most striking examples of that is through the use of food scents, of Subway and Cinnabon, Panera Bread and others. Very often, I think, our decision to eat may be triggered by the ambient food smells that we experience when walking down the high street. Maybe the decision to have that cup of coffee is not yours alone, but results from the smell of the coffee in the train station, in the bookstore or elsewhere. I mentioned light, and that's also a very interesting sense to work with in terms of well-being and controlling our behaviour. But there is literature out there on what's called Baker-Miller pink, a very particular kind of bubblegum hue of pink. And according to researchers back in the 1970s, if you put people in a room that has Baker-Miller pink colour, this bubblegum pink, then it will actually help to calm them, especially for aggressive prisoners and others that they can't exert as much force if they're in a Baker-Miller pink room. And so many holding facilities in North America and elsewhere are now coloured Baker-Miller pink in order to calm the agitated prisoners. In addition, some North American sports teams have also used Baker-Miller pink in the changing rooms of their opposition in order, as kind of a psychological warfare to calm them so they can't be as aggressive on the sports field. That eventually was banned, but again, it's another way in which the colour of the environment affects us. So, I've looked a little bit at smell, a little bit at sound, a little bit at colour. But I think really all of the senses come together, and the environments we inhabit are multi-sensory. They engage our eyes, our ears, our skin. And it's only really by understanding how the senses combine that we can really hope to design the environments that are optimal for whatever we want, hopefully to help enhance our social, cognitive and emotional well-being. And the tastes of nature too, each and every one of those has been shown to improve our performance across a range of domains, from very young infants through to old age, and from one country to the next. So I think that the notion of the nature deficit disorder is real, and in this talk I want to think about how we can hack our senses through each of our senses in order to reduce that deficit. But what's the evidence, really, that we are suffering from an absence or a shortage of exposure to nature in our daily lives? Well, surveys suggest that those of us who live in industrialised areas will actually spend about 90 to 95% of our lives indoors. And most indoor environments are not known for their similarity or their incorporation of nature into the built environment. So spending so much time indoors tends to mean that we're moved away from nature and all the benefits it has to offer us. I think most of us intuitively understand that to be the case. But where I think we all get it wrong is that none of us realise how much better we're going to feel after going out for a walk in the park or in the lunch hour at work, getting some natural daylight exposure. Even better if we can hear the birds, if we can smell the flowers or the trees. And it's that sort of inability that sort of underestimation of the benefits of nature that is, I think, at the heart of why so many of us don't ourselves get out into nature more, and hence why it's so important to see these very large studies, these meta-analyses demonstrating, quantifying just how much better each and any one of us will feel as a result of exposure to the kind of multisensory environments that perhaps we evolved in. Now, much of the talk about the nature effect and biophilia has sort of tended to focus on the visual. And after all, we are visually dominant creatures. And here, there's a lot of talk about the benefits of exposure to the greens of nature, of flora, and so on. Separately, there's also a lot of talk about the benefits of being exposed to water too. in what has come to be known as the blue gym effect. And again, similar studies showing that those who live near water, who have a view of water, tend to have enhanced well-being, both social and cognitive. And even if we go back 100 or 200 years, one sort of found English doctors who would very often prescribe a trip to the seaside for some of the patients that they had to improve their well-being. So intuitively, we've known for a long time the benefits of water and the sight of blue. And so this blue gym effect really combines with the greens of nature to put an emphasis on what we see and visual exposure to these kinds of environments being beneficial. But I think that is probably to miss the point in a way that nature can be experienced through all of our senses, and perhaps the sounds of nature are just as important as the blues and greens of nature and water to making us feel better in the lives that we lead. What it's missing, of course, and what I'd like to see more of, are the sounds of nature, both the sounds of bird life, but also the sounds of water features as well. And both of these auditory kind of nature or natural soundscapes have been shown to be beneficial to our well-being. And it's not just, birds full stop that work, or water by itself that works. These two kinds of soundscapes seem to have somewhat different effects on our well-being. So it can be best if we can combine the two. And while we have these separate contributions to the nature effect, the blues and greens that we see, and the sounds of water and, say, of bird life, of nature that we hear, probably the biggest boosts to our well-being come from combining the senses, probably most optimally in a congruent manner. But all too often, when we do find ourselves out in nature, be it when we're on a holiday and exploring the Grand Canyon, or be it when we go out to a little urban park, say, then there's a danger that the Anthropocene noise, the sounds of cars, of motorbikes, of aeroplanes, may actually be negating the beneficial effects of visual nature. And there is emerging research now that to show just how bad noise is to our performance, to our well-being, to our waistline, even to our life expectancy. The more Anthropocene noise there is, the worse for us. And I think, in particular, when we're thinking about the nature effect, we should do everything we can to try and eliminate those human-made, often mechanical sounds in order to really enjoy the benefits that nature has to offer to our senses. And London is full of, some of the most iconic recent skyscrapers to have been built are all very angular and pointy. There's an absence of curvature and a predominance of those angular lines. But the problem, while this might look great, the problem is that we are all drawn towards curvature, and we all sort of feel a certain aversion to angular forms, be that in the shape of a building, be that in the shape of the room that we're inhabiting, or be it even in the shape of the table that we are sitting at. That round forms encourage approach behaviour, whereas angular forms make us feel a little bit nervous. Some suggest that maybe our appreciation for round forms is really a version of the nature effect again, that nature tends to be round rather than angular and straight. And that's why we like the round forms. But for whatever reason it's there, it's only over the last few years we've started to see more visual design architects trying to engage with these more natural forms, be it in everything from Barajas Airport in Madrid. If you've been through there, you'll see these wonderful little round forms of the buildings that are much more approachable, that will probably lower our stress levels. And that same thing is played out both in the design of the buildings, the spaces, but even the furniture and tables. Now, one of the other ways that the contemporary workplace is so badly designed, I think, is from the rise of the open plan office. This is, loved by the accountants, much more efficient, put everyone in the same sort of space. They're convinced it improves workplace productivity. But in fact, the increase in noise that you get from an open plan workspace can be so detrimental to our well-being and to our thinking that it leads to something like a reduction of 1 hour a day in actual productivity from those who are in the open plan space. So again, it's a failure to consider the multisensory environment, and in this case, kind of neglect of the impact of sound and noise, other people's conversations on our ability to concentrate. Other solutions in this space I've seen coming out of Scandinavia in particular, again, those from another northern climate country, where again they have a lot of light hunger in the winter months, where they suffer a lot from sick home and sick building syndrome from being indoors in these poorly ventilated spaces with maybe a bad olfactory environment. Well, their environmental psychologists working in these countries have demonstrated that by playing the sounds of water, having kind of a trickling fountain or waterfall sound in the open plan office can help to mask the noise from other individuals. And perhaps in some small way, sort of engage the nature effect auditorily. And that sort of sound, as long as you think of it as water rather than white noise, can bring performance somewhat back up.